Hi, it's Kirby Sommers, and I want to welcome you to the Epstein Project podcast. It's the holiday period. We're in the middle of December, and so I want to wish everyone a really happy holiday and a much better new year for 2021. I know 2020 was challenging for many of us with the COVID situation, and a lot of people suddenly were left. Without jobs and there's been a lot of activity on the political front. And it's funny because I think prior to this time, a lot of people were really not political. And I think it's fascinating that the Jeffrey Epstein slash Ghislaine Maxwell slash Leslie Wexner case has sort of made everyone political because I've seen so many arguments. No, it's Clinton. No, it's Trump. Well, you know what? It does cross political lines. But today, what I really want to discuss is I want to talk about Leslie Wexner. And I know that's going to put a smile on your face. Unless we talk about Leslie Wexner and we snoop around and we share the tidbits that we discover, no one's going to tell us. We can't expect mainstream media to do that part. If you remember when Maria Farmer spoke to the three podcasters and gave them her story, she said, and actually she told me as well, she said that she was not allowed to, I think, go. It was either CBS or NBC, or she was on the way with someone to speak at a morning show, and that when she arrived, and she had to be driven, so it was a long distance, and that when she arrived, the producer wanted to know, well, what are you going to speak about? And she said, well, I want to speak about Leslie Wexner. And she was not allowed to speak. So anyone who wants to speak about Leslie Wexner does not get a chance to speak. So in any event, every now and then I will come across one of these sort of forums where people share information because they've worked with, let's say, Leslie Wexner directly, or because they live in Ohio, or because they know a person, or because they worked at a Victoria's Secret, or because they were a model and, they were sexually assaulted. And, I've heard a lot of stories, but I did come across an interesting sort of new post on one of these public forums, and it's from a person, and I believe this person is a woman, and so I'm going to refer to her as a she, who lives near Wexner's property, and who has been saying that, oh, well, she's been snooping around his estate, and in order not to sort of get booed by whatever crowd is listening, because I wouldn't necessarily boo her, but there are people in our midst who are not necessarily on our side. They're, the paid people watching and paying attention to what we say. So keep that in mind always. So what she says, it's this stuff is super plain view. If you drive down the road, it's like literally one of the main roads. You can see the guest house clearly, as well as the dog patrolled signs. So apparently there are signs around Wexner's property saying that it's patrolled by dogs. And if we remember Maria discussing being a guest at the guest house, she did say that there were Doberman pinchers on the property, trained to kill. So apparently there are now dog patrol signs. And then it says that besides the guest house, which Jeffrey Epstein owned for a while and he lived in, Epstein also owned another house in New Albany. And this person goes on to say that it was published in the New York Times. And in fact, I recall that, and I have that address somewhere. So I'll post that somewhere so you guys can see it. She goes on to say that one thing she finds pretty strange is the lack of Jeffrey Epstein's name on anything. Now, frankly, I don't find that strange because you really don't want to have the Jeffrey Epstein building. But I see her point because in New Albany, um, she goes on to say it's the new money name dropping town, and that literally every public thing is named after someone who works for the foundation or the development company, and that they even name the footbridge. So she just thinks that it's surprising that there was never anything named after sort of Jeffrey Epstein. He was, I'm gathering from what this says, he was, I guess, a hush hush person. Um, and then someone responded to this person's post, and this is going to go back and forth a little bit. And this person says, "Hey, I'm close by in Westerville. Nothing to share, but I heard the road to Les was closed with bogus bridge out sign. I also heard there were snipers on the roof as of Maxwell's arrest. Is there any truth to the gossip?" And so this person responds, "I know there are several entrances to Wexner's compound, and if you drive by on the main road, there are signs that say area patrolled by dogs. And if you go down a certain road near my home, which has other people's houses, there's this weirdly abandoned house on the corner, which some people suspect as a sort of guardhouse." Now that's fascinating because that sounds very, very likely. It's an abandoned house, and it could be a guardhouse. So there could be people hiding in there, sort of like um, waiting to see if there's going to be any trouble for Leslie Wexner. I can see that happening. Um, so then this person goes on to say the bridge out thing is interesting, though this road sort of nearby on the other side of town was closed for a super long time for road repairs. And there's sort of quote marks around the word road repairs. So I guess this person suspects that perhaps that was not true. And it says, and literally you couldn't get through all summer. So I don't know if it was related to, I guess, the Ghislaine Maxwell situation. But that's interesting because that would make sense that after Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested on July 2nd, that Leslie Wexner's security was ramped up. That makes sense to me because it's not like no one knows where he lives. You can Google him and pretty much find out where he lives. Also, Maria Farmer has a driver's license, and on her driver's license that she got when she was at his estate in 1996 for 3 months, um, there's his address is right on it, so it's not like he's super hard to find. Plus, all you really have to do is go to Ohio and find the biggest plot of land and the biggest home, and pretty much that's him. So maybe they amped up the security for him right after Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested. That makes sense to me. So this person goes on to say that Wexner has a lot of private security, and that I'll just read this. It says, "I've heard of people driving down the road near his house or just taking a stroll, and people in black cars sort of usher them off on a public road." So even if they're on a public road, um, they're not allowed to really be around Wexner's house. Is the is what I'm getting here. Um, let's see. Okay, so somebody responds, "Hey, be careful because he's literally mafia. That's insane." Thanks for the insight. Um, And, it goes on to suggest that anybody reading this should listen again to Maria Farmer's interviews. So Maria Farmer did an interview with Sean Atwood, and she did with Jason, I think his name is Jason Burmis. And of course, the first one she did was with Whitney Webb. So yeah, I think that if you're interested in hearing some information about Leslie Wexner's compound, which has snipers hidden behind the trees so that you don't really know there's snipers there, but there are. He has it's sort of like a military compound, and he has the Doberman pinchers, and that was back in 1996. So I can't imagine that it's going to be any different. Um, and like normal people, even if you're wealthy, you don't need this amount of protection. You just don't need it. But apparently, we know that Leslie Wexner was not always or is not necessarily someone who is a quote law abiding citizen, even though he has literally purchased Ohio. Um, when Epstein and he were best buddies, Jeffrey Epstein did help bring the CIA's Southern Transport Airlines, so SAT, which is the airline that was pretty much caught into the Iran-Contra drugs smuggling, cocaine smuggling, sort of guns, all of that. And it was Leslie Wexner's The Limited that was given as the excuse for bringing the CIA's airline to Ohio. And Epstein and Wexner did that. So something shady has been going on with Wexner for a very long time. So then another person chimed in to this conversation, and I'm going to read what this person says. I'm from Columbus, Bexley, and grew up in central Ohio. I had two uncles who knew Wexner and worked security for him years ago. They are both dead now, natural causes. My daughter worked at the New Albany Country Club during college and even did an event at the Wexner compound. She had to sign an 11 or 12-page confidentiality agreement, which has basically quieted her from talking about everything from the house layout, the art on the walls, the people that attended. It was a very it was just a very hush hush situation. There were a lot of armed guards during the whole thing, and I never let her do it again because I was just very uneasy about the whole thing. I couldn't put my finger on what was wrong. My uncle did say that the Victoria's Secret models were frequently on the property there in New Albany and another location in the South. He did say that he didn't think Wexner was interested in them, though. um, well, it goes on to say that, yes, that the rumors about Leslie Wexner in Ohio were that he was gay. We have heard this also from the amazing work of Bob Fitrakis, who long before we heard about Leslie Wexner. Well, I heard about him for 30 years because of my story, but long before the normal world that's listening to the Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell situation had ever heard about Leslie Wexner. No one really knew that he was possibly gay. However, Bob Fitrakis had been investigating. He's an attorney, he's a journalist, and he's a professor. And in fact, he and I co-wrote a book. Um, It's called Jeffrey Epstein Revealed, and it can be found on my website, kirbysommers.com. Just look for Kirby's books. So Bob Fitrakis was writing articles about Wexner years and years and years and years ago. He wrote about Spook Air, which was the situation with the CIA going into Ohio and setting up shop there. He wrote about the mysterious death of Arthur Shapiro, who was Leslie Wexner's tax accountant slash attorney who got shot down the day before he was to testify before a grand jury. He wrote about all this stuff. And at the time, he'd also become aware of a lost police report of the murder of Arthur Shapiro, which, by the way, remains unsolved to present day. No surprise there, right? And in that report, which Fitrakis references in one of his articles, he states that the investigator, who I believe, I don't have notes in front of me for this, but I believe his name was Sturgis. Sturgis used to say to Fitrakis that, Epstein was the boyfriend. And that's what they refer to him as. If you have been following the Jeffrey Epstein case carefully, then you know that one of the questions that Jeffrey Epstein was asked when he was being deposed was, did he have a sexual relationship with Leslie Wexner? Okay, so that it is something that has been discussed. It's a possibility that that's what happened. We don't know for sure. He took the fifth. He didn't answer that question. And certainly Leslie Wexner is not going to give us an answer at this point. What we do know is what Maria Farmer said in one of these interviews. And what she said was that Jeffrey Epstein told her in a very braggy sort of way that, oh, Les will do anything for me. Well, that's the kind of thing that somebody says about perhaps a new suitor because that person is sort of very enamored. And that's how that's really a little bit how Epstein carried himself in relation to Wexner's feelings about him. And Wexner and he, although I believe they had a connection that sort of was more guided by the fact that they were both doing things for the intelligence community, I think that there was a crossover of a personal relationship of some sort, and it's very likely that it may have been sexual. We also know from the court records that Virginia Giuffre has stated in the past Epstein had her have sex with Leslie Wexner. So she's named Wexner in addition to Prince Andrew, in addition to Alan Dershowitz, but she has named Wexner as one of those people. On a different note, and just moving away from this person's experience for a moment, I will say that I have heard from someone in Ohio who said that they have seen boys, young boys, going into Wexner's home, sort of his main home, for, quote, private parties. I've also heard, and this was a while ago when I was working on another book, I think it was my first book, Jeffrey Epstein, Predator, Spy, and I may have a snippet about this in that book. And again, my books are all on my website. But I heard that Wexner drove up in one of his many luxurious cars to a restaurant, and that the valet he was new there. He's a young, good-looking guy, and he sort of gave the key to the valet, and on his way out, there was this short conversation between the valet, a young guy, and Wexner. And again, this is alleged. And Wexner basically made a pass at him, and because the guy said, "Oh, do you think I might be able to get a job with you?" And Wexner replied in a very sort of sexy way, sort of inviting him anytime for you or something to that effect. I would have to go look at my notes, but he was flirting with this guy. And so after Wexner left, the kid, he didn't know who that man was. And one of the older guys said, "Oh, yeah, that's Wexner," and something maybe that, he had a thing for him. And so it seems like it was an open secret in Ohio. But the bigger open secret was the human trafficking, right? Because Epstein became involved in this massive organization. It's very well organized, where he had all of these girls in many different cities, um, involved in recruiting other young girls, and we're talking about 13, 14, 15-year olds, to not just give him sort of a massage. And let's remember that massage was code word for sex. It started off as a massage, it turned into a sexual assault. Um, and he paid them, and then these kids were young, inexperienced, and they were totally shamed. They took the money. They didn't know what to do. Some came back, some didn't. Some were turned into recruiters. I think if you're following the story, you know what happened. Epstein is theoretically dead, has been for about a year and a half, and Ghislaine Maxwell is currently in jail. Um, but yeah, there have been rumors about Wexner, and I kind of almost wish they would stay away from just getting stuck on, did Wexner have a sexual relationship with Epstein? Because what we really want is for Wexner to pay the price, like hopefully we can get Ghislaine Maxwell to pay the price for human trafficking. Okay, you cannot traffic women or children, and you cannot rape them, because when you have sex with a person or a child who has not said yes, who's sort of an inferior position because of their they need money, or you trick them, or you lie to them, or they're poor, you take advantage, you make a promise, all of these tricks that predators use, that's called rape, that is coercion. And so I'd love for the head of the snake, Leslie Wexner, to also have to face the music and be shamed and be dragged off to jail. Although, who knows? Okay. So this person goes on to say, he's the king around here and he runs absolutely everything. I don't think the media does a super good job of showing the scale of his project to develop this town. I remember my mom meeting her friend in New Albany back in the early 2000s, and there was literally nothing here except the Starbucks. Wexner and Epstein created a town out of nothing. Wexner had a good reputation. He often hosted nights where you can go to his house and listen to famous politicians and society people speak. And and kind of as I look back, I'm thinking, well, I'm just reading what this guy says, or this lady says, or this girl says. And then it says, kind of a weird fact, but I hear his helicopter flying over my house all the time. Now that's fascinating to me because, while I saw that he has a helicopter pad on his property, somehow it didn't connect. I saw a helicopter pad. I just forgot that he has a helicopter. So he's very much a Robert Maxwell type guy who has a helicopter. And he apparently, according to this person who hears the helicopter flying over their house all the time, he apparently is flying in that helicopter all the time. I would be curious to know where he's going. So let's see. What else did this person say? Uh, let's see. Um, uh, I mean, pretty much this person goes on to say that the Epstein guest house, and that would be Leslie Wexner's guest house, um, this person remembers being in awe at how amazing it is. And at the time, she said that you could pretty much walk right up to it. And then this reads, I can see how Maria Farmer could have felt very scared and isolated there. It's a huge, imposing structure and located past some trees in an open field. Strangely enough, the police station is located literally right across the road. If you were to leave the house, walk through the trees and onto the road. Another interesting tidbit is that a Christian radio station complex was located a little past the trees, maybe, 0.2 miles from the house. They've since torn it down, but I remember it being a little weirded out by the whole setup. So it goes on to say, I tried Googling the radio station, but nothing on Google. It was a medium-sized white building with an antenna and next to a little pond. Something I remember vividly is that they had a little doghouse out front shaped like a church. It was on the physical property too, close to the road. Kind of creeped out now. Hopefully it wasn't used for some clandestine purpose. So apparently there was a structure on Wexner's property that seemed a little bit odd, and it had a doghouse in the shape of a church. That seems a little peculiar, especially since Leslie Wexner is um, he's not Catholic. He is a very he's a very he's very much into Jewish activities, and Maria was not allowed to even go to I think it was sort of this restaurant or this sort of place where she was supposed to go and have her meals, and was not allowed because she wasn't Jewish. So he's one of the uh, he's a Zionist, and so for him to have on his property a Christian or a Catholic church is very odd. And what this sort of reminds me of is, if you remember, Zorro Ranch, which is Jeffrey Epstein's ranch in New Mexico, there was a large cross. I don't know if you recall it, but there was a large cross in his house. And for this guy, Wexner, to have a religious little compound, a little house, or anything religious shaped like a church when he's a Zionist, and it's sort of a little bit odd, just like the cross is odd in Epstein's house. Because, frankly, I'll just say this, that when all of this broke, I know that I live in New York City, so I just went over to Jeffrey Epstein's townhouse on 71st Street, which is not far away from me. And I took some pictures. And on the door, and I took a photograph, and it's probably still up on my Twitter, there's a mezuzah. And so that's just something that almost every person who is Jewish and who respects their religion puts on the door. And so, again, to have an object from another religion in your home, like in the case now that I see that it's also Wexner and Epstein, I think it's a little bit strange. I remember someone asking me about the cross in Epstein's house, if perhaps it was being used in some kind of ritualistic way, perhaps in black magic. So I don't know the answer to that. And I'm sure I can go off on a tangent now, but I'm going to refrain and I'm going to keep this just to what this guy or this woman is saying for the rest of this talk, which I'm going to try to wrap up soon. Okay. So this person goes on to say that there is something about Columbus, Ohio, that is skeevy, that there was the OSU abuse scandal and that women and children go missing every day. And then this person goes on to say that 8 or 10 of her former teachers have been exposed for pedophilia. Oh my God. Who has 8 or 10 former teachers who have been exposed for pedophilia? I mean, what is happening? Is it in the drinking water? I did not know that until I read this person's um, sort of like, conversation on this forum. It's very, very fascinating. So I'm going to do a little more poking around on Leslie Wexner, but I just wonder if you guys have any questions? Have you heard anything about Wexner? Do you live in Ohio? I know I have a lot of followers who live in Ohio, and only if every now and then, it's rare when my followers from Ohio will say something. So I'm going to encourage you that if you are from Ohio and you're sort of tuned in to what's happening, has there been a change in the way Leslie Wexner is operating after Ghislaine Maxwell has been locked up? Please put that stuff in the comments. If we don't share information, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, we're not going to know anything. So let's just keep the information flowing because it's up to us. In any event, I want to end this here and thank you once again for being amazing, amazing, amazing. You're such great followers. If you haven't subscribed to the Jeffrey Epstein newsletter, it's free. Just go to the website, Epstein Project, click on that, fill out the form, and I have now decided to send it out every Saturday. So you should have a new one every Saturday. And if you have supported me on Patreon, I am, that's for you. I'm applauding and clapping. Thank you. It's very nice of you. It's very kind of you. And everyone who's helped. I mean, you guys have been buying my books. You've been contributing. You've been just amazing. So, with that, I'm going to say happy holidays again, and we will do this soon. All right. Have a good one. Bye.